Hello. I'm doing a spur of the moment coffee chat because I realized that this week is actually National Grief Awareness Week. And I thought that we could have a coffee chat around grief and OCD. More in the sense of grief in the sense of the word, of like what OCD has taken from our lives. So I thought we could chat about that in honor of National Grief Awareness Week. But I already made my coffee. I already had a cup of coffee. So I'm going to refill my cup real quick, and then we're going to sit down and we're going to have a brief chat around grief and OCD. So here we go. Okay, so as I said, it is National Grief Awareness Week, and we are going to talk about grief and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and also just like kind of like a little bit like just blankets about like mental health, but all in connection with grief. So I think that first I want to mention that it's very common within our communities that when we think about grief, we think about the passing of a loved one or a friend or somebody that's no longer with us. And that's not the component of grief that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about, as I said in the intro, grief in the sense of what obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, has taken from us, and in that sense, not in the sense of loss of somebody that's no longer with us. But before we start that conversation, I was actually thinking about, because I was like, you know what? I want to know the actual definition of grief. So I went to Webster and I got the definition of grief to kind of start us off. So the definition of grief is a feeling of deep sorrow or sadness, a cause of sorrow, an unfortunate event, a cause of problems, a deep emotional distress caused by bereavement. So these definitions of grief from Webster's dictionary include these components that I want to talk a little bit about in connection with our obsessive compulsive disorders. A lot of the times my clients will come and a part of their treatment is making room for their grief of what OCD has taken from them. And what I mean by taken from them, OCD, within the OCD cycle, a lot of the times our lives can get like more constricting, smaller, narrower. A lot of clients, because of the fear and the distress that comes from the disorder, they feel like they can no longer be social. They can't hold necessarily like a quote unquote normal job. They can't leave their house, or there's only certain people or certain ways that somebody can come into their home or that they can enter their home, that they have to give up on dreams and aspirations, that getting married no longer feels doable. OCD took that from me. Or continuing with like the relationship idea, that OCD robbed me of my past relationships, or a past relationship that I broke up because I couldn't handle the urgency, the distress, the fear that came from my OCD symptoms within the relationship. I had to end it, or my partner ended it, because it was the compulsions, the obsessions, the fears, the doubt were too, quote unquote, too much. All of that is somebody's grief. There's a space in there that is important to talk about, that it's a cause of sorrow. OCD took this from me. It stole part of my life, part of my career, the things that others get to do normally, I can't, because of the stress and the anxiety, the overwhelm, all of those pieces. And so there's definitely need in treatment to have a conversation around grief and your OCD, because of the cause that of sorrow and sadness that it can also bring, not just the distress. So and how do we make room for that in our sessions, and the importance of making room for that? And I would say that a lot of my clients excuse me, a lot of my clients talk about, as a goal when we start treatment, and you might have heard me say this in another coffee chat video, but a lot of clients will tell me when we begin that I want my life to go back to the way that it was. I want to be normal again. I want my life back. And the acceptance and commitment component here, the acceptance, is that life isn't going to be the same after treatment. It's going to be different, and that's okay. And we can hold on to the pieces that you still want in your life. I want a relationship. I want to get married. I want to have kids. I want a career. I want to be able to just go to the grocery store by myself. We can do all of those things, but your life is going to look a little bit different. One, from like sort of like the developmental standpoint, right? Like that over time we change and we have new mindsets, and in treatment you're learning new mindsets and techniques and approaches and modalities that don't just, we don't want them to, but they also don't just turn off when you leave treatment. We want them to be a part of your life moving forward, day in, day out. But also from the stance that like time has also passed, and there's some grief in that as well, that like my life isn't going to be the same. I might not get my career back. I might have to apply to a different job. I'm gonna have to start a different relationship. You know, or that my relationship with my kids isn't going to be the same, because it's going to be different. I'm going to have to use different skills, techniques to cope with my obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors, challenging my compulsive behaviors. It's going to look different, and that's okay. And a lot of the part with grief and OCD is making room for the conversation, processing all of those feelings, the feelings of sadness, the feelings of frustration, the feelings of shame, guilt. Those are big ones that like can't be overlooked while we're processing this grief with OCD. We have to make room for it, because if we don't, like, we know that that grief and shame, if we don't talk about it, if we don't bring it into the open, it will fester in the corner. It'll fester and just keep growing. And the only way for us to really kind of tackle it is to talk about it, make room in the conversation for it. So these are pieces that we make room for in the conversation of let's talk about the grief behind OCD. I would say the other piece, along with like the processing, is definitely also big components of self-compassion, and also acceptance and commitment therapy. Like I've always said, right? Like I like to balance these modalities with ERP to help us, right? But we're talking about engaging in self-compassion and acceptance and commitment therapy a little bit differently with grief than we have talked about in the past in conjunction or combination to ERP. And with, you know, I've already kind of shared a little bit that like acceptance and commitment therapy comes into play with the acceptance that my life isn't going to be exactly how it was before OCD, before treatment. There's acceptance with that like my life is going to be different. There's some acceptance that OCD is a part of my life moving forward, no matter what. Like, we know that OCD isn't going to go away. There isn't a cure-all for OCD. It's a part of our life moving forward. So there's definitely some acceptance components there with the grief, but I would also say that there's a lot of self-compassion that needs to also go into play as well, just to show ourselves kindness, that we deserve kindness towards ourselves. More so, we deserve kindness and understanding and compassion. So I would say that there's definitely that piece, but my biggest thing around grief that like I wanted to mention is that grief has no timeline. There is no expectation of when you need to stop grieving. You can process the grief and then move away from that conversation with your therapist and come back to it, and that's okay. That is okay. Grief has no timeline. There is no expectation of when you can or can't be grieving in connection to your OCD. We make space for it whenever it comes up. We make space for it for however long it needs to be there, because it deserves its time and its space within your processing, within your treatment journey, also within your recovery journey as well. It needs that space. And so I would say that, like, I wanted to give that like reminder that like grief deserves, it needs its time and its space, and that there is no timeline. And you can grieve about these components for as long as you need to. And so like making that space or asking your therapist to make that space, I would say would be crucial in sort of this processing of grief in connection to our OCD. So those were some of my just like initial thoughts on grief with OCD. I would say that those are the pieces that can be commonly missed within treatment, because there's such a focus on the behavioral side, exposure behavior side, but it's necessary, it's needed, it's crucial to give those that struggle with OCD the time and the space and to explore what OCD has taken from them for their recovery journey. They need that time, they need that space. So I hope you have a wonderful day. Like I said, I know this was a short video. I will be posting another coffee chat video this month, so I will see you again in a couple short weeks, but I wanted to take the opportunity for National Grief Awareness Week to chat about OCD and grief. I hope you have a great day. Stay warm wherever you are, and I will see you in a few weeks. Bye.